The scent of old books and lemon polish was supposed to be a comfort. It was the smell of my childhood home, a scent that had always meant safety. Today it felt like a lie. The air was thick with it, suffocating me as I stood in the living room my mother had spent the last month refreshing. The faded floral sofa was gone, replaced by a sleek, gray modular thing that looked about as comfortable as a slab of granite. The walls, once a cozy butter yellow, were now a stark, minimalist white. It was as if she was systematically erasing every trace of my father, and by extension, the life we'd had. Elara, stop hovering. He'll be here any minute. My mother, Beatrice, flitted into the room, a whirlwind of ivory silk and nervous energy. At 58, she was radiant, her smile a little too bright, her eyes a little too wide. She looked like a woman about to jump off a cliff, convinced she could fly. I'm not hovering, Mom. I'm acclimating. I gestured vaguely at the new art on the walls, abstract splashes of color that meant nothing. It's all very new. It's a new chapter, darling. She adjusted a vase of white lilies on the mantelpiece, her hands fluttering. Arthur loves clean lines and open spaces. Arthur Blackwood. The man who had swept my pragmatic, sensible mother off her feet at a gallery opening 6 months ago. The man who was now her husband. The man whose son was. My stomach clenched into a cold, hard knot. I hadn't seen him in 15 years. Not since I was a gangly, braces-clad 14-year-old, and he was the 18-year-old local demigod, all ripped jeans, smoldering eyes, and a guitar slung over his shoulder like a weapon. Jax Blackwood. The boy whose face had been plastered on my bedroom wall, right next to my meticulously hand-drawn anatomy charts. The boy whose mixtape, a collection of raw, grungy songs he'd recorded himself, I'd worn out from playing it on a loop, the chords seared into my soul. He was the secret soundtrack to my adolescence, a rebellious, thrilling countermelody to my own straight-A rule-following life. And now he was going to be my stepbrother. The doorbell chimed, a melodious two-tone that was also new. My mother froze, her hand flying to her throat. They're here. I forced my feet to move, following her to the door like a condemned woman walking to the gallows. She took a deep breath, painted on that brilliant smile, and pulled the door open. Arthur stood there beaming. He was a handsome man, with kind eyes and a head of distinguished silver hair. He looked exactly like what he was, a successful, retired architect who played golf and appreciated fine wine. He enveloped my mother in a hug. Beatrice, my dear. You look breathtaking. And then, my eyes shifted to the figure leaning against the doorframe behind him. Time didn't just slow down, it warped, twisted, and snapped back into place with the force of a physical blow. Jax Blackwood was no longer a boy. He was a man carved from shadow and sinew. He traded the ripped band tees for a simple, tight-fitting black Henley stretched across a chest that was decidedly broader. The jeans were still dark and worn, hugging lean hips and long legs. His hair, once a shaggy, sun-streaked brown, was shorter, styled with a deliberate carelessness that probably took 20 minutes to achieve, falling over one eye. The lines on his face were deeper, more defined, framing a mouth that seemed permanently set in a faint, cynical curve. But his eyes, they were the same. A startling, turbulent sea green, and they were currently fixed directly on me. A slow, devastating smile spread across his face. It wasn't the warm, open smile of his father. It was a look of sharp, amused recognition. A predator recognizing its old, familiar prey. Well, hello there, Elara, he said, his voice a low rumble that hadn't lost any of its gravelly, magnetic quality. It vibrated right through the floorboards and up into my bones. Long time no see. My mouth went dry. All the witty, composed greetings I'd rehearsed vanished from my mind, leaving a blank, white static. I was 14 again, standing at the edge of the mosh pit, desperately hoping he'd look my way. Jax. I managed, my voice a strained whisper. Hi. Arthur clapped Jax on the shoulder. Come in, son, come in. Don't stand there lurking. Jax pushed himself off the doorframe and stepped inside, his presence immediately swallowing all the oxygen in the newly sterile room. He carried the faint scent of leather and cold night air. His gaze swept over the modern furniture, the white walls, the lilies, and then back to me, one eyebrow quirking slightly as if to say, "What the hell is all this?" The house looks different, Jax commented, his tone neutral, but his eyes were laughing. It's a fresh start, my mother said, her voice a little too high. We're so thrilled to have you both here. Elara, why don't you show Jax to the guest room? I've put him in the blue room down the hall from you. My heart hammered against my ribs. Down the hall from me. Of course. Sure, I said, my voice miraculously steady. Follow me. I turned and walked, hyper-aware of his footsteps behind me, heavy and deliberate on the polished hardwood. The hallway seemed to stretch for miles. I could feel his eyes on my back, tracing the line of my spine. I pushed the door to the guest room open. Here you go. Bathrooms across the hall. Towels are in the closet. He stepped past me, his shoulder brushing mine. A jolt, electric and unwelcome, shot through me. He dropped his duffel bag on the pristine navy blue comforter and turned to face me, crossing his arms over his chest. The movement made the fabric of his shirt strain. So, he said, his gaze sweeping over me from head to toe, taking in my sensible sweater, my tailored trousers, my professional pulled-back hair. Little Elara Vance. All grown up and curated. I bristled. It's Elara Finch now. Finch was my father's name. I'd never let it go. Finch, he repeated as if tasting the word. Right. The brainy one. You were always buried in some massive book. I remember. He remembered. The thought sent a treacherous thrill through me which I immediately squashed. And you were always getting detention for playing guitar in the school halls? I retorted, crossing my own arms. His smile widened, a flash of white in the dim room. Still do. Just in bigger halls now. That was the other thing. Jax Blackwood wasn't just a local rocker anymore. He was the lead guitarist for Kintyre, a band that hovered just on the edge of mainstream success. They weren't superstars, but they had a loyal following, toured constantly, and their music still had that raw, unpolished edge that had first captivated me. I knew this. I'd followed their career with a secret, shameful fascination. Congratulations on your success, I said, the words feeling stiff and formal. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. The air crackled. You don't sound too congratulatory, stepsis. The term was a deliberate provocation, laced with a dark, unspoken history. I took a step back, hitting the doorframe. I'm happy for you, I said, my voice tight. And for our parents. He let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. Are you? You look like you're about to be sick. This is weird for you, isn't it? The geeky little sister from next door, all grown up and, surprisingly, not little anymore. His gaze was a physical touch, hot and unsettling. I felt exposed, seen in a way I hadn't been in years. This was a disaster. A beautiful, terrifying, utterly off-limits disaster. Dinner will be ready soon, I choked out and fled, his low chuckle following me down the hall like a ghost. Dinner was a study in surreal politeness. My mother had outdone herself with a roast, seasonal vegetables, and an expensive bottle of Bordeaux that Arthur praised effusively. They sat close, their hands brushing, their conversation a bubble of shared jokes and plans for their upcoming honeymoon in Tuscany. Jax and I were the dark moons orbiting their happy planet. He was mostly silent, answering Arthur's questions about the music industry with monosyllabic grunts, his attention seemingly absorbed by swirling the wine in his glass. But I could feel his focus, a tangible weight across the table. Every time I looked up, his eyes were on me, speculative, amused. So Elara, Arthur said, turning his kind gaze on me. Beatrice tells me you're a literary editor. That must be fascinating work. It is, I said, grateful for the neutral topic. I work primarily with nonfiction. Historical biographies, mostly. She's being modest, my mother interjected. She's a senior editor at Penman and Locke. She discovered that bestseller about the Habsburg dynasty. Jax's eyes met mine. Biographies, huh? So you spend your days digging up other people's dirty secrets. I spend my days preserving history, I corrected, my tone cool. Same thing, isn't it? He countered, a challenge in his green eyes. No one wants to read about the saint. They want the scandal, the affairs, the hidden failures. The crimson thread of sin running through the pristine tapestry. The way he said crimson thread made my breath catch. It sounded like a lyric. Not everything is about scandal, Jax, I said. Isn't it? He took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving mine. It's what sells. In music, in books, in life. People are hungry for the messy, the real, the forbidden. The word forbidden hung in the air between us, pulsing like a live wire. Well, my mother said, her laugh a little too brittle, I think it's wonderful that you're both so passionate about your work. It's so different. After dinner, I escaped to the kitchen under the guise of cleaning up. I needed a moment, just a single moment, where I wasn't hyper-aware of his presence. I leaned against the cool stainless steel fridge, closing my eyes, trying to slow my racing heart. The sound of a guitar, soft and tentative, drifted from the living room. It was a familiar melody, one that tugged at a deep, hidden part of my memory. I crept to the doorway and peered in. Jax was sitting on the new, uncomfortable-looking sofa, an acoustic guitar resting on his knee. His head was bent, his fingers moving expertly over the frets. He was playing a stripped-down, melancholic version of one of the songs from that old mixtape. A song called Whisper Wire. A song I hadn't heard in over a decade, but whose lyrics were etched onto my soul. Your world is black and white in reason lines, and mine is static, bleeding through the signs. I'd cross every wire, start a fire, just to see you look my way. He was muttering the lyrics under his breath, his voice a raw whisper. He was changing them, tweaking the melody. This wasn't a performance, it was a private moment of creation. And I was intruding. I must have made a sound because his head snapped up. His fingers stilled on the strings. Sorry, I said quickly, stepping back. I didn't mean to. It's fine, he said, his voice losing its softness, turning guarded. Old stuff. Just working through a block. It sounded good, I said, and I meant it. He looked at me, a long, searching look. You remember it? It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I could have lied. I should have lied. But the intensity in his gaze pinned me in place. Yes, I whispered. I remember. A strange, unreadable emotion flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the usual cynical shield. Go to bed, Elara, he said, turning his attention back to the guitar. It's late. I fled for the second time that night, the haunting, unfinished melody of Whisper Wire, chasing me up the stairs and into my dreams. The next 2 weeks were a special kind of torture. Jax was a ghost in the house, his presence felt more than seen. He kept strange hours, often coming home long after I'd gone to bed, the low rumble of his motorcycle in the driveway pulling me from sleep. He'd be gone most of the day, presumably at a studio or a rehearsal space. Our paths crossed in the kitchen, in the hall, brief, charged encounters that left me feeling flustered and off balance. I was trying to work from home, editing a dense manuscript on the War of the Roses, but my concentration was shattered. I'd find myself staring out the window, listening for the sound of his bike, my heart leaping at every creak of the floorboards. The tension was a living thing, coiling in the air between us. It was a mixture of unresolved adolescent longing and a very adult, very dangerous attraction. He was everything I'd ever been taught to avoid. Unpredictable, emotionally unavailable, a walking, talking scandal waiting to happen. And he was my stepbrother. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday. My mother and Arthur had left for their honeymoon, leaving Jax and me alone in the house. The silence was deafening. I was in the living room, curled up with my laptop, trying to focus on the intricacies of the Tudor succession. Jax came down the stairs, dressed in his usual uniform of black, a guitar case in his hand. He stopped when he saw me. I'm heading out, he said. Band rehearsal. Don't wait up. I wasn't planning on it, I said, not looking up from my screen. He didn't move. I could feel him hesitating. Look, he said, his voice gruff. This is stupid. I finally looked at him. What is this? He gestured between us. The walking on eggshells. The awkward silence. We're adults. Our parents are married. We're stuck with each other, at least for now. I'm not stuck with you, I said, my pride stung. I have my own life. Do you? He tilted his head. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're hiding in this beige prison, editing books about dead people, terrified of anything that might smudge your perfectly ordered world. His words hit a nerve, a raw, exposed truth I didn't want to acknowledge. You don't know anything about my world. I know it doesn't have to be this sterile, he shot back. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm playing a show tonight. A small, divey place downtown. The Black Lagoon. You should come. The invitation was so unexpected, it stole the air from my lungs. What? Why? Because you need to remember that life isn't all footnotes and bibliographies. Because I wrote a new song. He paused, his gaze intense. And because you were always my most honest critic. It was the last part that undid me. The acknowledgement of our past, of the secret connection I'd thought was entirely one-sided. He'd known I'd listened. He'd known I'd cared. This was a terrible idea. A cataclysmically bad idea. What time? I heard myself ask. The Black Lagoon was everything its name promised. A dark, sticky-floored cavern smelling of stale beer, sweat, and amplifier feedback. The air thrummed with a primal energy that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I stood at the back, surrounded by a crowd of people half my age, feeling like an anthropologist on a field trip to an alien planet. When Kintyre took the stage, the room erupted. Jax was the last to walk on. He didn't say a word, just slung his guitar over his shoulder and launched into the first searing chord. The sound was a physical force hitting me in the chest. It was loud, messy, and utterly brilliant. On stage he was transformed. The brooding, silent man from my mother's house was gone, replaced by a raw, powerful presence. He was a conduit for the music, his body moving with a natural, predatory grace. He wasn't just playing the guitar. He was wrestling a beautiful, noisy beast into submission. His fingers flew over the frets, creating a wall of sound that was both chaotic and perfectly controlled. He didn't look at me. Not once. And yet, I felt like every note, every growled lyric was being played directly for me. They played a mix of their known songs and new, rougher material. The crowd surged and swayed, a single, pulsing organism. I stood frozen, captivated. Then towards the end of the set, the cacophony faded. The stage lights dimmed to a single crimson spot on Jack's. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice quieting the room. "This is a new one," he said, his voice raspy. "It's a work in progress. It's called Scandalous Things." He began to play. It was a slower, more melodic tune than the others, built on a haunting, repeating riff. And then he started to sing. "You curate your world in shades of white. I paint my sins in the dead of night. You trace the lines in history's book, while I'm the dangerous off-limits look." My breath hitched. The lyrics, they were about me. About us. About the scholar and the sinner. He was laying it all bare, turning our impossible, forbidden tension into art. His voice was raw with an emotion I couldn't name, longing, frustration, anger. And they'd call it a scandal, a terrible fall. To want what you can't have, to risk losing it all. But your reasoned world and my reckless strings are tangled up in scandalous things. The song built to a crescendo, the guitar crying out in a solo that was pure, agonized beauty, before fading out on a single lingering note. The silence that followed was profound, before the room exploded in applause. He finally looked at me then. Across the smoky, crowded room, his sea-green eyes found mine. And in that look I saw everything. The shared past, the electric present, the terrifying, undeniable pull. The thread he'd spoken of wasn't crimson. It was live, sparking, and it was wrapped tightly around both of us. I turned and pushed my way out of the bar into the cool, damp night air. I was trembling. He had just announced our secret to a room full of strangers, and I was the only one who knew. He found me on the front porch steps an hour later, sitting in the dark, listening to the distant hum of the city. I heard the purr of his motorcycle, the crunch of gravel, his footsteps. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside me, the warmth of his body a palpable force in the cool night. We sat in silence for a long time, the unspoken song screaming between us. "You left," he finally said, his voice quiet. "You wrote a song about me," I countered, my own voice shaky. "I write songs about what I know. About what gets under my skin." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You've been under my skin since you were 14, Elara Finch." A quiet, serious little thing who looked at me like I'd hung the moon, even when I was at my most worthless. I stared at him, stunned. "You noticed me?" He let out a short, harsh laugh. "Noticed you? You were the only person in that whole damn town who didn't see me as just a troublemaker or a passing curiosity. You saw the music. You listened. It was terrifying. And intoxicating." He turned his head to look at me, his profile sharp in the moonlight. "And then I left. And I thought I'd forgotten. But walking into that house, seeing you all grown up, so smart and beautiful and so fucking composed, it all came screaming back. 'This is impossible, Jax,' I whispered, my heart aching. "Why?" he challenged, turning fully to face me. "Because our parents fell in love? That's a technicality. We're not related. We never grew up together. The only history we have is this thing that's been simmering for 15 years. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from my face. The touch was electric, a spark that ignited the tinderbox of tension we'd been building. I flinched away. "It's not just a technicality." I stood up, wrapping my arms around myself. "It's a betrayal. It would destroy them. It would destroy us. My mother would never understand. The scandal, your band, my career, it would all be a scandalous thing," he finished for me, his voice flat. He stood up too, facing me. "So that's it? You're just going to keep editing your books and pretending this doesn't exist? Pretending you didn't feel what I felt in that room tonight when I was singing for you? I can't do this, Jax." Tears welled in my eyes, hot and shameful. "I'm not like you. I can't just tear everything down for a feeling." His expression hardened, the vulnerability I'd seen moments ago vanishing behind a wall of cool indifference. Right. The safe choice. The reason line. I should have known. He shook his head, a bitter smile on his lips. Good night, Elara. Don't worry. I'll make sure to keep my messy, scandalous strings to myself from now on. He walked into the house, leaving me standing alone in the dark, the echo of his song and the ghost of his touch haunting me. I had drawn my line in the sand and he had accepted it. It was what I wanted. So why did it feel like my heart was being ripped in two? The following week was a Cold War. Jax effectively moved out, spending all his time at a friend's place or on the road. The house was empty, silent, and hollow. I tried to bury myself in work, but the words on the screen blurred together. My perfectly ordered world felt grayscale, devoid of the color and chaos he'd brought with him. My mother called from Italy, her voice sun-drenched and happy. How is everything, darling? Are you and Jax getting along? Everything's fine, Mom, I lied, my throat tight. He's busy with the band. Oh, that's wonderful. You know, Arthur and I were thinking when we get back maybe we could all take a trip together. A proper family vacation. The word family felt like a punch. I ended the call quickly, guilt a sour taste in my mouth. I was a coward. I had chosen the path of least resistance, the one that wouldn't rock the boat, the one that protected everyone's feelings except my own. And his. I thought of the raw hurt in his eyes when I'd pushed him away. I'd rejected not just him but the most honest, passionate part of myself. The part that had once worn out his mixtape and dreamed of reckless things. The climax came 2 days later. I was cleaning out the hall closet trying to find some semblance of control when I found it. Tucked away in a box of my old high school things beneath yearbooks and science fair ribbons, was the original cassette tape. Jax, Demos 09, was scrawled on the label in his messy handwriting. My hands trembled as I held it. It was a relic, a testament to a time when I'd been braver with my heart, even if only in secret. I found an old cassette player in the basement, dusted it off and with a deep breath pressed play. The sound was tinny, the recording full of hiss, but the music was there. The raw, unpolished talent. The aching vulnerability in his young voice. I listened to Whisper Wire, and I heard not just the teenage rocker but the man he would become. A man who felt things too deeply, who translated his pain and longing into sound. I had fallen in love with that boy's music. And I was in love with the man he was now. The thought was as terrifying as it was liberating. It was the truth, my truth, and I had been too afraid to claim it. I had to find him. I had to tell him. I didn't know where he was staying, but I knew where the band rehearsed. A rented warehouse space in an industrial part of the city. I drove there, my heart in my throat, the old cassette tape sitting on the passenger seat like a talisman. I heard the music from the parking lot, the distorted wail of a guitar, the thunder of drums. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The space was vast and echoey, filled with equipment and tangled cables. The band was in the middle of a song, a furious, driving thing. Jax had his back to me, lost in the music. When the song crashed to an end, the drummer saw me first, nudging the bassist. They fell silent. Jax turned around, his expression annoyed at the interruption. When he saw it was me, his face went blank with shock. Elara? I need to talk to you, I said, my voice barely carrying across the space. He hesitated, then handed his guitar to the bassist. Take 5, guys. They filed out, giving me curious looks. The heavy door clanged shut, leaving us alone in the cavernous, silent room. What is it? He asked, his tone guarded. Did something happen? I was wrong, I said, walking towards him, my steps echoing. I was a coward. You were right. My world had become sterile and safe, and I was using it as a shield. I was so terrified of the mess, of the scandal, of hurting our parents, that I was willing to hurt us instead. He watched me, his arms crossed, but I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. I found this, I said, holding up the cassette tape. I listened to it. I remembered the girl who wasn't afraid to love this music. She was braver than I am. But I want to be her again. I stopped in front of him, close enough to touch. You're not a scandal, Jax. You're the most real thing that's ever happened to me. Your messy, reckless strings, they're the only thing that makes my world make sense. I don't care about the technicalities. I don't care about the rules. I just care about you. For a long moment he just looked at me, his gaze searching my face, looking for the truth. Then the wall around him crumbled. The hardness in his eyes melted away, replaced by a warmth, a relief so profound it took my breath away. He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. It's about time, Finch. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming, a release, a culmination of 15 years of suppressed longing. It was the answer to the question his song had asked. It was messy and real and utterly gloriously scandalous. My arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer, the world tilting on its axis. In that moment, surrounded by amplifiers and the ghost of his music, I chose the crimson thread. I chose the messy, the real, the forbidden. I chose him. 6 months later. The book launch was a swanky affair at a downtown art gallery. My book. The biography I'd been editing had been published to critical acclaim, and my publishing house was throwing a party. I stood near the podium, wearing a dress that was a deep, defiant crimson, accepting congratulations. My mother and Arthur were there, beaming with pride. They had taken the news of Jax and me surprisingly well. There had been shock, of course, and a long, difficult conversation. But their love for us and their own happiness had ultimately paved the way for understanding. It was still unconventional, still raised eyebrows, but it was our truth. The crowd parted, and I saw him leaning against the far wall, dressed in a dark suit that looked both alien and incredibly sexy on him. He winked at me, a slow, intimate smile that was just for me. Later, as the party wound down, he found me on the balcony looking out at the city lights. "Quite the shindig, Editor Finch," he said, coming to stand beside me, his arms slipping around my waist. "It was," I said, leaning into his solid warmth. "Thank you for coming. I know these things aren't really your scene." "Anything for you," he murmured into my hair. He nodded towards the party inside. "You know, for a World of Reason lines, you fit in pretty well." I turned in his arms to face him. "I've learned that the best stories aren't found in the safe, white spaces between the lines. They're found in the messy, handwritten notes in the margins. In the crimson strings that bind it all together." He kissed me soft and deep. "I have a new song for you," he whispered against my lips. "It's called The Margins." I smiled, my heart full to bursting. "I can't wait to hear it." Our story would never be simple. It would always be a little bit messy, a little bit rock and roll, a little bit scandalous. But it was ours. And it was just beginning.